Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is another random Q&A session asking anything you want about Game of Thrones, and I'm delighted that this time I've got a guest along, and it's one of my favorite people in the community. He's been on here a few times before, and is always excellent value for money. And if you've not checked out his channel, please do. But LML, do you want to say hi?
Yes, absolutely. It is customary to greet people with you human terrestrials, you do that thing, right? Where you say, yes, of course, I am happy to be here on Deep Geek. I'm here to bring my Squisher shirt to you, Robert. It says, let's go fishing. It's got a very nimble dick-like sort of vibe with the little children in the Squisher. So,
I
yeah,
officially do not understand that t-shirt, but it looks lovely.
there's nothing to understand, man. It's just a swamp monster.
Excellent. Okay, guys. Well, as I said, this is a random Q&A. As always, I will be answering questions that have been put to me beforehand by my patrons, and I'm delighted that they've been throwing lots of incredibly random but really good questions. So we're going to be dotting about all over the place in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, also a little bit of Fire and Blood, I suspect, also thrown in. We did get a few super chats actually before we went live. So first of all, I want to say thank you, a huge thank you to Maura Lee for $50. That was incredibly generous. Thank you so much. Saying no questions. But just a show of appreciation for all the hard work and excellent content. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. And Shadow Fox saying, would love some streams that start early in the UK. I can only stay up for the late ones, maybe one a month. And I am actually thinking of doing that. I have done some in the past. I will do a few more in the future. Once a month sounds about right to me. So yeah, you guys have been asking me this for quite a while, and yeah, we're definitely going to be doing that. So probably, I think weekends, maybe something like once a month, 8 or 9 p.m. UK time. I don't know quite what that would be in American time. Take off 5 hours or so, so something like 3 o'clock in Eastern Standard Time. We will do some roughly once a month. And also Helen or Helena, make Mordor great again. Hi, good to see you. Another European friend with 11 euros and 1 cent. I forgot my question because it's late. I wanted to say very late, but this is Robert's stream and we shouldn't make him read out these things. She didn't say very, she said a naughty word. Hashtag make Euro streams great again. And I know Helen has also been lobbying me to be doing some Europe friendly live streams, so we will definitely be getting onto that. But let's start with a couple of questions from my patrons, and these, as always, some of these are going to be mainly show questions, some of these are going to be mainly book questions, but from Henning Jessen or Jessen. Hi Robert, recently watched a video of another content creator who argues that George R.R. Martin foreshadows Tyrion will be king in the end and that Sansa will be queen. What do you think about that? Well, it's a good question to start with, whether or not there is foreshadowing for Tyrion being queen and Tyrion being king and Sansa being queen. I did happen to have, and I don't know which other content creator you were referring to there. I happened to have a mark in one of my favorite sections of book 1, where we read, this is from Jon's perspective, when Tyrion and Jon are meeting very, very early on. You'll probably remember the scene from season 1. And Tyrion says, remember this, boy, all dwarfs may be bastards, yet not all bastards need be dwarfs. And with that, he turned and sauntered back into the feast, whistling a tune. When he opened the door, the light from within threw his shadow clear across the yard, and for just a moment, Tyrion Lannister stood tall as a king. So yes, there is some foreshadowing early on that Tyrion was going to be king. But one of the reasons why I love having LML on is that I know that he's always got to hand many examples of these kind of foreshadowing and the kind of thematic side of things. So LML, what foreshadowing is there that Tyrion might end up king?
Well, I was busily pulling up that exact same quote that you were, because that's the one that I had at the top of my head. I don't think there's any other quotes that are exactly like that. He gets a couple that are similar where his shadow is as tall as a giant, which could be sort of taken in the same respect, where Martin is using Tyrion's shadow to sort of foreshadow, if you will, greatness, a giant role. I think it's Jorah Mormont or Aemon. No, it's Maester Aemon who says, "I think a giant has come among us," or something like that. And of course, that plays off of the teasing giant of Lannister name that he gets told. So I'm looking forward to see if there is a King Tyrion in the history. There is, yes. Let me look it up in the wiki. That'll probably give me the tale in the condensed
Well,
form.
while you're doing that, I'll talk a little bit about the fact that the other aspect of this is the Tyrion Targaryen idea. Now, this idea is the fact that perhaps Tyrion might be the bastard child of the Mad King Aerys II, and if so, that makes him part Targaryen and also have another claim to the throne. And so when he if he takes the throne, then he has got a Targaryen claim as well as a Lannister claim. So yes, there is some other element going on there that perhaps he does. And the other thing I would add on is the historical bit of it's not foreshadowing so much, but we talk about it quite a lot and I think it is quite important that the original idea that George R.R. Martin had was to base this story on the Wars of the Roses, which was these two houses, House Lancaster and House York, who were at war and they fought over many, many years. And obviously we can see the link between House Lannister and Lancaster and York and Stark, and the way, high level stuff here, but the way that war ended was by the merging of the two houses of House Lancaster and York. And so the question is, does this mean that the way that this story ends is by the merging of houses Lannister and Stark? And if you had to say who is most likely to survive in House Lannister, it's probably Tyrion. And who is most likely to survive in House Stark, it's probably Sansa. So that is also another little bit of, again, it's not foreshadowing, but it's a kind of a historical theme which George R.R. Martin may be trying to bring across. But did you manage to find that thing you were looking for?
Yeah, so and just to comment on what you were saying, I do think there is some sense to that. I mean, Sansa makes the most sense, or one, she's a leading character. Like if there's going to be a queen or king of Westeros, or of a significant chunk of Westeros, Sansa seems ideally suited for her arc to end at that place. Tyrion would. I question whether Tyrion could sort of come back from that far from the dark place that he's going, which may be still going darker. Kind of feel like he might be going down, but who knows? George does like Tyrion, so maybe he'll redeem him somewhat. There has been a lot of Lannisters I've noticed in the histories, Robert, who end up disfigured and end up living afterwards. So it's possible he'll lose his tongue, as some people think, but that'll be the punishment, if you will. But I do like the idea. I think it's a sensible question, just without addressing the foreshadowing or the symbolism. I could see that. It would be funny if Sansa and Tyrion's sort of failed, contrived marriage wound up coming full circle and actually making some amount of sense. You could see that. But okay, so King Tyrion III is a Lannister king who, it looks like he was one of the last First Men Lannister kings who saw the Andals invading. And so this is from the World of Ice and Fire. It says, however, the boundaries of their kingdom did not reach their full scope until the arrival of the Andal invaders. The Andals came late to the Westerlands, long after they had taken the Vale and toppled the kingdoms of the First Men in the Riverlands. The first Andal warlord to march an army through the hills met a bloody end at the hands of King Tybolt Lannister, called, unsurprisingly, the Thunderbolt. The second and third attacks were dealt with likewise, but as more and more Andals began moving west in bands large and small, King Tyrion III and his son Gerald saw their doom ahead. And it says, rather than attempting to throw back the invaders, these sage kings arranged marriages for the more powerful of the Andal war chiefs with the daughters of the great houses of the West. So just to build on what you were saying about Starks and Lancasters, the last King Tyrion was one of those people who united these two warring factions and produced a house that was unified out of that. So maybe that could be foreshadowing indeed. What do you think?
Yeah, I do agree. Actually, it's I think that and incidentally, if we had King Tyrion the third, then there were at least King Tyrion the first and King Tyrion the second. So yes, there has been a Tyrion king before. I think that you were talking about his character arc as well there. I think that he's not reached the bottom point of that yet.
No.
We see that Tyrion's arc on the show, he kind of reaches his bottom point somewhere around where he's at in the books, where he goes out of King's Landing. He's trying to drink himself to death, and then he gets captured and by Jorah. That's what happens in the show, and that's the point when he starts to work his way back up. And in the books, we see that he's in sort of the same kind of place there. He's currently actually in the middle of a war zone, which is probably not a good place to be. But you kind of get the feeling that the only way from here is roughly heading back upwards again. So yes, I agree, he has been on a downward trajectory, but I think that he's going to be kind of putting this back up. We've got a couple of super chats that have come in. I just quickly like to come to, so Kids28, $10. Thank you, that's very kind. Always a pleasure when two of my favorite A Song of Ice and Fire content creators get together. Thank you, that's very, very nice of you. It's always a pleasure for us, actually. Incidentally, we were saying this, we had a bit of a love-in before we went live. I do really enjoy having LML onto this channel.
Can't quit you, Robert.
Did you just say, can you quote me? I don't know. What are you going to say?
No, I said, I can't quit you. That's a Brokeback Mountain joke.
He can't quit me. This is very true. It's quite touching, really. Let's go. And we also had Anime Lover Nicole. Thank you. €10.99. That's very kind of you. This was a question earlier in the chat about the Umbers being really tall and the Reeds small. Is this because of intermingle of giants and singers? Now, I'll definitely throw this one to LML in just one moment. I think that definitely with the Reeds, there is more than a hint that at some point in their past, there was some kind of mixing of the gene pools, as it were, with the children of the forest. That's definitely hinted at. And I think with the Umbers, particularly when you think of the sigil of the giants, there is kind of a hint of that going on there. But is beyond those kind of high level things, is there anything else we could look out for there, LML?
I'm sorry, I got lost in the chat real quick. Rephrase the question for me.
So the House Reed and the children of the forest,
okay, yes,
House Umber and the giants is, other than the obvious things like the sigils and the sort of the stories about their past, is there any are there any other kind of clues that perhaps there was some kind of intermarriage or something along those lines going on in those houses past?
Yes, I mean, I definitely think that is a thing. But on both counts, I think when Osha the Wildling looks at Hodor and says he's got giant's blood in him, we're meant to like put that in the classification of like truthful things that old Nan says or whatever. Like, I think there's definitely some truth to that. I do think that Martin is imagining a lot of the various humanoid creatures, from the hairy men. There's actually two different kinds of hairy men from Essos, a taller one and a shorter one from Ib, and the children of the forest, and different kinds of giants. I think they all interbred at different times and places. I think that's the general tapestry of the world that Martin is showing us. And as far as the Umbers go, there's a lot less conclusive evidence, but I do think it's logical to assume that these really tall people from the north, thousands of years ago, there's a bit of giant's blood, sure. Because the wildlings even have like sayings about it. It's like, oh, well, it has to be a giantess and a human man, or else it doesn't work, and stuff like that. So it's something that they think about and talk about. It's in the folklore, and it probably happened a little bit. The Reeds are more important, obviously, and like you said, George basically spells it out. There's no question they have children of the forest blood, more recent, I would say. So the Starks, obviously have a little bit, right? The Ward King, they married into the Marsh King's family when they adopted the neck, and I would say it probably goes even back before that. I would suspect the last hero was a skin changer, and his dog was a dire wolf and all that. So the thing is that the Reeds have a more recent influx of Children of the Forest genetics, which is probably why they're a little more green, a little more swampy, shorter, and all that stuff. Whereas the Starks, it's more distant. Maybe the Starks also have some of the Giant's blood of the Northerners to balance it out, whereas the Cranogmen don't. And then part of it is just environment. Like there's not, it's not as nutritious food in there. It's limited numbers. So it's possible that over thousands of years, that's going to affect the evolution of the Cranogman a little bit too.
Yeah, I think, and another thing I would add to that actually is that the way that the world was presented to start with, this is something I think George R. R. Martin has deliberately done, is that the way the world was presented to start with was very black and white. If you're a Targaryen, this is what you look like. If you're a Stark, this is what you look like. Therefore, it was very set down in stone. This is what the different groups look like. But the more that this world has opened up, the more we get to see that actually, like our world, everybody's this kind of mix of different races and histories and heritages all across the piece. And particularly when you look at things like Fire and Blood, you realize that the Targaryen bastard children were everywhere. You realize that all across when Cregan Stark, there's this amazing bit when Cregan Stark, just at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, comes down with an army from the north of, I think it was something like 10,000 men from the north. And these are men who can't return to the north because there isn't room for them because it's winter. And so what do? Well, they say, well, actually, we've been having lots of battles down here in the Riverlands. There's lots of women who have lost their husbands. Let's try and do a bit of matchmaking. And so what we find is that actually in the Riverlands, it's not this largely Andal community that we might think. Nowadays, it is probably quite a lot of First Men blood going on there because of all these Northerners that come down. So initially, George R. R. Martin has set up this incredibly or this image of this incredibly pure racial split across the different groups in Westeros, but in reality, it's a lot more mixed than we might originally think. Just to pick up on Benjamin Johnson, $25, that's very kind, saying, thank you so much for your content. What are your thoughts or predictions on Qyburn's endgame? Do you think it will be more based on wildfire, the creation of more science whites, or both? I think both is the short answer. I think definitely we're going to be seeing more of his science whites, as I like to call them. So the mountain is a prototype. This was the thing that we've got. Qyburn's been working towards all his career, is this idea of how do you get life or hold on to the bit of life that lingers after death. And the mountain is the result of that, the first result of it. It's the proof that he needed that you could do something. And I think as we've got 2 books to go, there will be more of these. He will create, if not an army, then certainly a number more of these kind of like science whites, the people that through his understanding of the world he has created beyond death. And if you look on the show, I don't think it was a coincidence that you had that shot of him staring quizzically at the hand of the white that John and Sandor and the rest of them brought back down south. I think that there's a good chance on the show he may well create more as well. So that's definitely on the cards. In terms of wildfire, I definitely think that we're going to see some more of the wildfire beneath King's Landing. This is something that Cersei is the Mad Queen. That's the echo that she is, and I think that we're going to see whether or not it actually explodes is a different matter. but the threat to destroy all of King's Landing with it
It's gonna
is a very
explode.
real one, and an echo of what happened with Jamie before and the Mad King is going to happen. That I think is very true. So I think both of those things will happen. Is there anything you wanted to add on to that, LML?
Yeah, I do think there's an explosion in the works because the Sept of Baelor is a mirror for the moon, what I call the ice moon, but just think about it as the moon. And I think that just as there was a moon disaster in the ancient past to cause the previous long night, if we're going to get a new long night, then we're going to need some new moon meteors. And I do think there's a ton of foreshadowing for that. Hashtag ice moon apocalypse. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the things that represent the ice moon have this promise of blowing up. And so I think that is going to happen just as it did in the books. I mean, maybe not exactly the same, but I think the show got that from the books. That's one of the things that George may have mentioned. It's going to get blown up. And the idea of more science whites is really awesome. I never thought of that until I heard someone say it recently. But that's really interesting. How many could he make? Could he make enough to matter? God,
I don't know, but I think he will make more.
It's going to get really dark in King's Landing. Good Lord.
I mean, I think that this is a slight digression, but I think that one of the themes which is going to come out from this is that this is very clearly not a battle of the living against the dead. This is the show has kind of turned it into the army of the dead attacking, and those who still breathe are defending, and that's not what's going on in the books. That's definitely not what's going to happen. I think Qyburn's going to create some of the living dead. We're going to have more than just the few people who have been reanimated as kind of fire whites. I think there's going to be a lot more of that going on, and actually suddenly we're going to find that we've got an army of the dead against some living and some dead, and it's just going to get very confusing. It's not going to be this living versus dead idea that that perhaps some people were thinking it might be.
Well, and then we're also going to get
so much.
You also got.
Oh, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, to jump in. There will be dead people fighting for the living too. Cold Hands and soon to be John, and who knows how many others.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've got the examples already, and obviously in the books we've got Lady Stoneheart as well. And on the show we've still got Beric running around. So it's not as clear cut as you might originally think. There are the dead fighting for the living. Martin, thank you so much. Anti-magic maester conspiracy based on current tension between science and religion, or showing academia is just as power hungry. I personally think it's a bit of both. I think that the maester conspiracy against magic is real. I think that is a thing which has appeared throughout history in Westeros, particularly the last 300-400 years worth of history in Westeros. And does it show the current tension between science and religion, or showing academia as just as power hungry? I think I would go on this, that one of the things that I'll go off on a digression, guys, apologies. J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, a couple of my literary heroes, they were in a writing group effectively called the Inklings, and they were great friends, but they also had disagreements about writing. And one of the disagreements that they had was this idea of allegory versus applicability. C.S. Lewis wrote a lot of stuff that was very allegorical, stuff like the Narnia stuff, very clearly allegorical about the sort of the Christian mythos and the Christian story. And J.R.R. Tolkien, in writing The Lord of the Rings, wanted stuff that was applicable. You read The Lord of the Rings, you can draw lessons from it, but it's not trying to say this is the truth at you. I think George R.R. Martin very much goes towards the second of those, the Tolkien angle. I think that he is wanting A Song of Ice and Fire to be applicable rather than teaching and preaching at us. I think that is where he's coming at it. So Does it show academia as just as power? I think it does show academia as power hungry within that world. I think that's certainly a thing that we can learn from there. Does it reflect the tension between science and religion in our world? Yes, I think it does, but I don't think he's trying to make a point so much as trying to make us reflect on something. Is there, I mean, that we could, this is the kind of thing I'm sure that both of us could talk about for a while, but LML, have you got something to add on that?
Yeah, I got a quick thing I can say. I hear your trepidation as you like pass it, like, well, okay, so you can. All right, so look, the fire of the gods is one of the most important themes of the book, and the fire of the gods can actually be religious thought, or it can be magic, or it could be scientific power, because really it's just power. It's a rare power that not everybody has, and it usually works as a metaphor for something new. So when we discover the atomic bomb, you could say that we have tapped into the fire of the gods. We now have the ability to blow up our entire planet. Chemistry and the ability to edit genes works as a fire of the gods. We can now make monsters, but we could also maybe heal diseases too. And so it's the same thing with the Zora High using the magic of the moon meteors, or Lightbringer, or the first Green Seers using the magic of the Weirwood Net. They now have the ability to mess with things. Maybe they can raise the dead, or make others, or edit the timeline a little bit, or try to and screw everything up, or call down a hammer of the waters, or maybe even crack a moon. So Martin is very fascinated with the concept of power. Most people see the layer of political power because obviously that's right on the surface. The Game of Thrones, it's all about political power and the violence that's inherent in that struggle. But if you extend that metaphor of power out to the magical ideas, it works very well as also. And I think all of those lessons and dangers that he's talking about can be extrapolated right onto our own modern version of the fire of the gods, which is technology and science. And so that's how I'd sort of approach it. And that way it's not even like science and magic or those two things in opposition, which there is a surface level conflict there, but on a deeper level, it's really the same idea of mankind. With great power comes great responsibility. I guess that's the operative phrase here.
Excellent. So we've managed to go from George R. R. Martin to Tolkien to C.S. Lewis to Spider-Man. This is truly broad stuff. Okay, so B1 Mary, thank you so much. $5. Is the Night King a bastard Stark or a Targ? I have done a few videos on this. The Night King, certainly in the show, the Night's King in the books is a Stark. Full stop. I think that this is reasonably clear from a number of routes, but particularly in terms of the powers on the show that we very clearly see the Night King have, are a kind of a dark version of the Northern, the First Men kind of powers of being able to warg into people, and you see the same kind of powers that Bran has, the Night King has as well. I'm sure you've seen the people who are saying that the Night King is a Targaryen. Do you give that any?
No. Well, no, they're almost right, but they're wrong. He's not a Targaryen because the Targaryens didn't exist, and neither did the Valyrians. But the Great Empire of the Dawn did exist, which we could simply think of as the ancient people in Ashai who tamed dragons before the Valyrians did, that we've been hearing about from A Game of Thrones all the way through the World of Ice and Fire. We do know that, or at least we don't know, but we're given very strong clues that dragon lords existed before Valyria did. That's who built the Fused Stone Fortress at Old Town, which is a big clue that not only were there dragon lords, but that they came to Westeros, which is how the story of Azor Ahai, which is all about dragons and fiery swords, might have something to do with Westeros, the Long Night, and the others. Everybody knows that. Most people have figured out by now that Martin loves these historical parallels. If it happened in the past, it's going to happen again, although maybe like inverted so that it's kind of like an answering to the original statement or whatever. But like Jon and Bran reprise the last hero. Certain other people reprise the Night's King or the Azor Ahai role. Everybody's figured this out now. So if we've got this big conflict coming between Targaryens, Dany and Jon, and their dragons, and maybe Tyrion too, and the others, it makes sense that there must have been a dragon versus others kind of ice and fire conflict in the War for the Dawn. And the big clue is that the last hero had a blade of, quote, dragon steel. So We don't know what that sword was. Maybe it was Lightbringer, maybe it was Dawn, maybe it was an early form of Valyrian steel. But the point is, the name Dragon Steel implies that from the beginning, this sword was at least associated with dragons. And then once we pick up the clues about the Great Empire of the Dawn coming to Westeros, we can see that Azor Ahai, the story of Azor Ahai, must have something to do with the Westeros part of the Long Night. So when we figure all that out, we can say that there is a potential for the blood of the dragon to be running around in ancient Westeros. And without running too far down that rabbit hole, I do think that Night's King was in part blood of the dragon. And I think that the reason why the others have cold burning blue star eyes is because it's basically like the fiery blood of the dragon turned cold by the womb of the Night's Queen. I have a little bit of a heretical idea about Night's King and Queen, which is that they actually existed during the Long Night and created the others, or at least the first version, perhaps you might say, of Night's King and Queen. I do think that that is how the others were created, some sort of magical reproduction thing. And essentially the blood of the dragon is an ingredient into that. But I also think that, Robert, I think you know about my theory that House Stark essentially now descends from a stolen baby of the others, a stolen Night's Queen baby. Just like Gilly's baby was supposed to be given to the others, but was rescued and taken south of the wall. I think that is an echo of how House Stark essentially got the blood of the others into their bloodline. And that's another theory that a lot of people like is, do the Starks actually relate to the others? Do they have the blood of the others somehow? I do think they do. I think it's from an escaped Night's Queen baby. So essentially my answer to Mary, B1 Mary, shout out Horny Goats, is that it's both. There was blood of the dragon that went into Night's King, but Night's King's child became a Stark that then all the Starks descend from. So there's a little bit of both going on, but that's a lot of personal theory craft. Don't take what I'm saying as like canon there. That's totally like my theorizing. So
yeah, and that certainly the Knights King and Queen stuff is, as you say, heresy. So what I would say is that I am personally clear that the others have got Stark blood. I'm less convinced that the Starks have got others' blood in them, but I think that's a discussion for another day. There was a question from one of my patrons, Cherim Miller, who was saying, I was wondering who you think Azor Ahai was. Many say the Bloodstone Emperor, some say it was Stark. Could it be that the Bloodstone Emperor is the first Stark? As this is following on from that, I thought I'd let you carry on your train of thought, Elmer. What do you think on that in terms of the Bloodstone Emperor?
So that was my very first theory, was connecting the Bloodstone Emperor and Azor Ahai as being the same person. Because the Bloodstone Emperor is credited as causing the Long Night by committing the blood betrayal, which means he usurped the rightful ruler of the Great Empire of the Dawn, the Amethyst Empress, his older sister, essentially. And so basically when he slew his sister, that was a deed so evil that supposedly it caused the Long Night. Well, I think that what caused the Long Night was the cracking open of the moon and the pouring out of these moon meteors. And in the Azor Ahai story, he's killing a woman too. Just like the Bloodstone Emperor kills Amethyst Empress, Azor Ahai kills Nissa Nissa. And when Nissa Nissa cries out, that's her cry of agony and ecstasy cracks the moon. And so we're given this rough idea that the killing of Nissa Nissa caused the cracking of the moon, or was timed at the same time, or is associated with it somehow. And so those two stories to me lay on top of one another. And you get the Bloodstone Emperor Azor Ahai, an evil dude, stabbing his wife, who was also his sister, and causing the Long Night. So he's working some very dark deed of blood magic, which was either maybe timed to the cataclysm or perhaps was somehow involved in causing it. And so then you go along and, like I said, we've got signs of these dragon people, Azor Ahai people coming to Westeros, and eventually some of that blood could get into the Starks or the Danes or whoever all that works. So there's some possibilities for that. But Robert, what I always say is that it's probably likely that this Azor Ahai Bloodstone Emperor idea is what you might call an archetype. And so you have the father and the son. You have a bunch of warriors that all have flaming swords, and they're all like, quote, Azor Ahai people. So I don't know if the Bloodstone Emperor is Azor Ahai, is Night's King, or that's a father, son, grandson thing, or like people that just take up a similar mantle and wear that title of Azor Ahai. I don't think George is spelling it out in that level of detail, and so I always resist going that far. I like to leave it up to people to sort of choose your own adventure as far as whether you think it's the same exact guy or maybe they were brothers, a bastard brother, because there's lots of brother fights that seem like that archetypal drama, you know. So that could be a Crowfoot's daughter, for example, really likes the brother pattern and has done a couple cool videos about that.
Yeah, I would completely agree with the archetype idea. I think that's very clear that that's something George R. R. Martin uses a lot, having an archetype that is reflected often more than once in history and then also in the present day. A couple of things I'd kind of pick up on the Bloodstone Emperor. We don't know huge amounts is the short answer, and I think that it's very easy to read too much into the Bloodstone Emperor because he's a fascinating character on the little amount that we know. One one thing I would say is that we hear that he did bad things and the long night happened. I do not necessarily think that we should equate correlation with causality here. This is the kind of thing where we have to say, okay, exactly the kind of thing that has happened many times in different cultures in this world, where someone does something and someone else says, aha, and then the Nile flooded. Therefore, this must mean that that person doing this thing makes the Nile flood. It doesn't necessarily equate that the two things, what the first thing caused the second thing. It might just be coincidence. And the second thing I would say is that I really like this counter narrative that Azor Ahai is not necessarily the hero. He might be a bad guy, or indeed, because the only thing we actually know that Azor Ahai did was stab his lover in the heart. That's
right.
Not a really good thing for a person.
It's at least questionable.
So exactly. So at best, this character is quite mixed, we have to say. So I think that this counter narrative that we shouldn't necessarily see Azor Ahai as being this great savior of humanity, full stop. I think this is a really important point that George R. R. Martin is making. There is no character in this world who is 100% good or 100% bad. And that applies to Azor Ahai as it does to any character. But I want to bring us to the Tower of
Moon
Joy.
Meteors, because you forgot to mention the Bloodstone Emperor worshipped a black stone.
Well, I was kind of hoping maybe we could get through this one without talking about the moon meteors. Nobody's asked about them yet, guys. If you want to ask about moon meteors, go ahead. But you've got our moon meteor expert going on here. So, but I want to take us to the Tower of Joy, because we had both a super chat and one of my patrons have been asking about this. The super chat was Time for a Kiss. Thank you so much. Saying the Tower of Joy, why did Ned and Arthur Dane fight if they were both trying to protect Lyanna? It's not like Ned was going to kill his own sister. And then also I had one of my patrons, Susan Dunkel, was saying, asking about Arthur Dane when he says, and so it begins. What was beginning? I doubt you're speaking about sword fighting with Ned, and it certainly wasn't about the larger picture of war in Westeros, because that'd been going on for months. So what was that about? Now, at this point, I shall do the same thing I've done for about the last couple of months and say, guys, I know I've been promising you a video on the Tower of Joy. It is coming. I took a little bit of a break because of Fire and Blood, and then obviously there was Christmas, but I am back on it.
I'm impatient. I want that video, man. I want that damn video.
It's coming soon, I promise you. The next video in that series is about whether Rhaegar and Lyanna married in the same way that they did on the show. Then after that, we're going to be moving on, and we were going to come up to the Tower of Joy and what was really going on. To pick up on Susan Dunkel's question about and so it begins. Well, all of this we have to say about the Tower of Joy is within this context of Ned's fever dream, so we can't take anything too seriously. Well, we can take it seriously, but we don't, not too literally. I think actually this is reasonably understandable when we come at it from Arthur Dane's perspective. Now, we have to understand Arthur Dane was this legendary fighter. He was a member of the King's Guard. He's there to protect the king, but he's obviously very close to Rhaegar, and he's there obeying Rhaegar's instructions. And he was there at Dragonstone when this fateful decision was made that Rhaegar went forth with his small group of allies. That we know Arthur Dane was one of them. Oswald Went was another. There were probably a few more. I will speculate on who those might be in future videos. But the important point here is that Arthur Dane traveled with Rhaegar, collected Lyanna with whatever happened there. Then they went off and ended up in the Tower of Joy. And something like 18 months or so passed by while the entire continent was at war. Arthur Dane was not fighting. Arthur Dane was there with instructions to stand here and guard this point. And he will have had at some point some kind of pep talk, perhaps from Rhaegar, saying, you know, that when we capture Lyanna, something big's going to go down.
I'm sorry. No, hold on. I can give you the whole dialogue here. Now you stay here and make sure no one enters the room. Make sure no one leaves the room. Yes.
Exactly.
It was that whole routine.
But so he was there right from the beginning, being told that this was going to be a big thing when they took Lyanna, or Lyanna came with them, probably more accurately. Then this was going to kick off into some big thing. But he'd also been told to hang around, and so when finally, after 18 months, which is a long time from one person's perspective, when finally, after 18 months, Ned turns up with half a dozen people and it looks like it's going to be a little fight, finally, then Arthur Dane says, finally, so it's beginning. My bit, my time has come. This is where I get involved. That, for me, makes sense in terms of his internal dialogue of what's going on. And it also makes sense with Ned, because Ned has been fighting this hugely long war. He's worked his way up to the north. He's come back down again. He's fought battles. He's broken a siege. And then finally he thinks the thing which is going to end it is this last thing here. So for both of them, it's Arthur Dane's first act of all of this, and it is Ned's last act of all of this. So that's what that bit of conversation, for me, that's what makes sense. And I'll throw to LML in just one moment. But in terms of the question of why they fought, I think this was a matter of Ned, clearly, when he arrived there, thought he would have to fight his way through whoever in order to get to what he wanted, which was Lyanna. So that's why he was going to be on the offensive. And as we've already said, Arthur Dane was going to be on the defensive because he'd been given one order, which was to defend the tower, to defend Lyanna. So that was why the battle started in the first place. I think it was just a misunderstanding. And what I am going to, and I always spoil my videos, you know this by now, my view is the fact that Howland Reed's intervention was not to stab Arthur Dane in the back. His was another intervention. We just know that that Ned would have died but for Howland Reed, not that Howland stabbed Arthur in the back. So that's where I think I'm going to be going with that. But LML, what do you think on all of that stuff that happened at the Tower of Joy?
Well, I'd like everyone else. I'm just sitting here waiting for you to tell us what happened, man. There's no one that does these sort of investigative analysis better than you. You know, I also think of like History of Westeros and Radio of Westeros. Sometimes they get into this sort of analysis, but this is kind of your bread and butter, is solving mysteries in a very, the very logical, rational mysteries that involve logistics and clues. There's no one that puts it together better than you. So I'm just waiting to hear what you got to say about that. But I will drop a cool little symbolism tip that's going on at the Tower of Joy, which is a great scene. First of all, so the even star, Venus, is, or I should say Venus is both the morning star and the even star, right? Are you aware of that and how that works?
Ish. But for my benefit, as well as those who are watching who may not be aware, would you give us the 20-second version?
Sure, yeah. So Venus is a planet that's closer to the sun than us. And so from our perspective on Earth, it's always going to appear near the sun. Like if I'm Earth and the sun's over on my left, Venus is never going to be way over there. It's always going to be kind of like on one side of the sun or the other in regard to Earth. And so without explaining all of the mechanics, essentially Venus appears as a star in the sky, and it actually appears as the brightest star in the sky. If you look really hard, you actually, and you have really sharp eyes, you can see it as a crescent sometimes, but it's effectively the brightest star in the sky. And because of its positioning, it spends 200 some odd days rising at just before sunrise. And what it does is it rises up from the equator or the horizon line, and it gets about a third of the way up the sky, and then the sun comes out and it sort of fades away. And that's when it's known as the morning star. And after about 200 days, it passes behind the sun, it comes out on the other side, and now it's the even star. And so now it appears as the first star of the evening to come out. It's very reliable. It always appears fairly low on the horizon, and then over the next 2 or 3 hours, it drops down to the horizon and it sinks and then it disappears. And that's when it's called the even star. And it oscillates between these two positions. And so House Stark and House Dane essentially represent that duality. And the House Dane is all about the morning star, sword of the morning. The idea of it's a star sword, bringing dawn. That's all Venus stuff. When it's as the morning star, it ushers in the dawn because it rises just before the sun. And so it's literally the light that brings the dawn, if you will. Now, the Starks have Venus symbolism, but it's all like even star Lightbringer symbolism. Like you think of Night's King, you think of them supplying the Night's Watch who dress in black. And so when they show up at the Tower of Joy and Arthur Dane says, now it begins, and Ned's like, no, now it ends, it's basically them acting out their morning star, even star Venus duality. So I go into that more in Blood of the Other, if anybody likes that. But probably the thing that's even more relevant is the fact that the others are watching at the Tower of Joy. Say what? Yes.
No, sorry, I was just getting caught up in the chat. We've got a lot of excellent comments going on there. I think what I'll do very briefly at this stage, which is what I do roughly halfway through all of my live streams, is just to let people know stuff which is going on my channel.
I was actually making a point there.
I'm sorry. I got as is the way of these things. I got caught up reading on the chat. What? Give me the one sentence version.
Well, so what I did is I finished one point and I stopped, and then I said, okay, well, here's the next thing. And then that's when you started paying attention again. So what I was saying is the others are at the Tower of Joy watching John's birth. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm going to say no. Go on.
Okay, so Ned's Dream of the Tower of Joy has Lyanna's blue rose petals blowing through against a blood red sky, right? And it says they're as blue as the eyes of death. But the eyes of death that are blue are obviously the eyes of the others, which are blue and cold as blue stars, right? So we got the blue eyes of death, but not only that, the blue rose petals are associated with a winter rose. And Danny sees the blue rose growing out of a chink of ice in the wall. So there's ice and winter associations with the blue rose and the eyes of death. And they're up in the sky where you would see stars. So effectively, Martin has painted the blue star eyes of the others in the sky at the Tower of Joy. And I believe that that is an important clue that it is John's birth that has triggered the others to awaken. And that fits into the whole idea that the others have their own prince that was promised prophecy. They're looking for John when they confront Waymar, all of that stuff. I think they see John coming. That is what is causing them to stir, is John's birth. So that's a bit of a more of a concrete thing that you can sink your teeth into that I wanted to give you there before we move on.
No, I think that's really interesting. And apologies for sort of moving away from it halfway through. I think that what brought the others back is for me, it's one of the most fascinating kind of conundrums we have. For me, I don't think it was the birth of John, for the simple reason that they seem to have been gathering the army through Craster before that. I think that seems to have been that Craster link seems to have been happening for about 40-ish years.
40, is that the math you did?
Yeah. So John, however, is not 40 years old. So I think that for me, whatever was stirring them happened before that. So I certainly
well, it could be that
like
they
the
saw it
idea
coming.
well, so did they see it coming? Well,
yeah, perhaps they anticipated
potentially
it.
they did, and I think that I'm starting to come to terms with the idea that maybe we will never know for sure. That George R. Martin's not going to tell us, that it was just like one of those things where maybe they saw that the prince that was promised was coming and they thought, well, now is our time to be rising or whatever. Maybe it is like that, but perhaps they just don't know, or perhaps, and this is an open thought that I haven't finished, perhaps it was something about Summerhall that did something, because there was definitely some big magic going on there. But I'm slightly digressing now. I do like the idea that the others were watching, if not literally, then kind of thematically.
Right. Yeah. I didn't even mean literally.
Yeah, so I think that was that. I like that idea a lot. I'd not picked up on that, and so thank you. That was really really helpful. I was going to go off and sort of let people know what's happening in the on this channel coming up, but I just very quickly want to go through. We've got quite a backlog of questions, so I'm going to quickly rattle through my answers to some of these questions, and then Almal, if you wanted to pick up on one or two of these afterwards. B1 Mary asks, who will raise the Kings of Winter? Jon, Bran, Sam, or the Night King? I wonder whether this is a reference to my video about the idea that the Horn of Winter is going to be blown, and that's what's going to raise the dead Starks from the crypts of Winterfell. If so, I don't think it's going to be the Night King. I don't think it's going to be the others, because these are the defenses against the others. And so we're then left with who has got the power to do it. And I suspect it's probably one of the Starks. And so for me, perhaps Jon is the person to do it. Perhaps that because he does, we always think of him as being, secretly a Targaryen, but he's also secretly a Stark, but just not the way we think of it. So I wonder whether that might be the way forward. Kids28, thank you very much, asking, why does R plus L not equal J persist despite all of the confirmation? I'm going to do another one of the videos I'm going to do in this series is me setting out what I think is all the evidence for R plus L equals J, which is, I think now it's reached the point where we can just say it's almost a fact, 99.5% certain. And the reason why I think it has this idea that R plus L does not equal J has persisted is two reasons, I think. Firstly, I think that the community has started second guessing itself. I think that we've got into this idea of some things are too obvious and overlooked the fact that it actually took the community several years to come to this conclusion of R plus L equals J. But some of us who have come into it, I'm going to say later, by that I mean we didn't read the first book the first day it came out. We came in slightly later in than that, perhaps after 4 books, or perhaps after season 1 or something like that. To us is presented all of this evidence by people who've done the hard work, and then we go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then we think of it as being pretty obvious, but actually it's not obvious. And I think that what is happening is that the community has been second guessing itself and saying that's obvious when actually it's not. And secondly, I think that there are some people who have put some convincing arguments, not necessarily against it, but some question marks there that don't necessarily add up until you've done some really hard work to try and unpick those. And I'm going to try and unpick a few of those in my video. But I think that there are some people who have done some quite convincing videos suggesting alternatives that perhaps haven't been addressed in the way that they could have been. So that's my view on that one. The third of these super chats I want to quickly pick up on: scripts, clips, series, and flicks. $10. Thank you so much. Do you think Tommen could end up becoming a science white? Maybe Cersei's Valonqar. Yeah, I think Tommen could indeed become a science white, because he probably will die in the books. Whether it's exactly the same way, I don't know, but he almost certainly will die in the books. And I think that both Cersei and Qyburn will survive him. And we know that Qyburn has a way of taking the bodies and doing stuff with them. So I think it's entirely possible that Qyburn will do some experiments, probably without Cersei's knowledge. Will that make him Cersei's Valonqar? It's possible, but personally, I think that the Valonqar imagery points a lot more towards Jaime. I've said this before, or possibly Arya. That's where I see that going, rather than Tommen himself. LML, did you want to pick up on any of those questions before we move on?
I'm in total agreement with everything you said on all three of those.
Fantastic. I love it when we agree. Okay, well, in that case, I will go to where I was going to go, which is just to let people know a few things that are going to be coming up on my channel. As I've said, I'm going to come back into my what I personally consider epic, because I put a huge amount of work into it, series of videos about the tourney at Harrenhal, Robert's Rebellion, and the Tower of Joy. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it. My next video is going to be, in that series, is going to be about whether Rhaegar and Lyanna actually married in the books. We know they did on the show, but whether they did in the books. Then I'm going to be starting to look at what happened at the Tower of Joy, R plus L equals J, and then I want to have a look at the final two that I think it always seems to expand. I want to look at the book character Fagon as we know him. I want to try and dig into what's really going on there. Is he really who he claims to be? And then secondly, I want to answer the question of or I always come back to this, and I always say it's tinfoil, but I don't actually think it's tinfoil. If in doubt, blame Bloodraven. I want to unpick what is the influence of Bloodraven and Howland Reed in all of that arc that we've got going through, from the tourney at Harrenhal, Robert's Rebellion, and the Tower of Joy. What is their role? Because I think that they're really pulling a lot of strings behind the scenes that we can see when we pan back out and have a look back down. So that's what I'm going to be doing on that. I've probably got one or two more Fire and Blood videos I want to bring out as well. But on my second channel, The Well Told Tale, for those who don't know, please do go check it out. There's a link down in the description, probably also one in the chat. Some of my wonderful moderators. Thank you, moderators. You are great. I've probably put that one up there. But we have just literally a few minutes ago, or possibly an hour or two ago, we have hit 2,000 subscribers for my second channel, which I am really excited by. This is just a little passion project for me, a bit of a side project, but it's me doing audiobooks, basically, of what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. We're currently doing The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We've done a Conan story. We've done War of the Worlds. We've done Frankenstein. We're going to do, we did A Christmas Carol for Christmas as well. And we're going to just start moving out into all of the classics of this genre. So if you're interested in that at all, please do go check that out. Final thing I would want to say is, patrons, thank you. I say it every week, but I mean it every single week. I cannot do this without your support, and thank you so much. If you are interested in supporting the channel, or if you want to get access to some exclusive audio stuff I do over there, some audio narrations, early access to stuff, a chance to influence the content that I make, please do go and check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/InDeepGeek. link down in the description. But LML, what's coming up on your channel?
I've got, well, I've been exploring green seer symbolism in my series called the Weirwood Compendium. And it's been a lot of brand stuff in the first part of the series. And then in the last couple episodes, I've actually been dealing with all the green seer symbolism that's clustered around Daenerys, which sounds really bizarre at first, but it's like really overwhelming. Are you hip to the whole green sea metaphor wordplay, Robert? I think I've explained that to you before, right?
Remind me.
So the idea is that the green seers live in the Weirwood net, right? It's this place, okay? So when Patchface talks about things happening under the sea, he's actually talking about things that happen in the green sea, which is like the realm of the Weirwood net. And so basically all the stuff about squishers, about drowned things, crows under the sea, and all this other stuff is actually stuff about green seers. It's this running wordplay thing that we found that goes really far. So for example, Azor Ahai is prophesied to be reborn from the sea. And Daenerys ticks all the marks of Azor Ahai reborn, amongst others. And she is reborn in the Dothraki Sea, which is green. And so essentially, this is the idea of someone being reborn from the Weirwood net because this is happening in the Green Sea. And it happens all through Dany's chapters. She rides her silver horse, which is a metaphor for Sleipnir. And there's all this other cool astral projection stuff. And it's a lot of fun. I know it sounds, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it probably sounds pretty crazy. But you know, tune into my channel, check out Weirwood Compendium 1, and just go from there. We're on Weirwood Compendium 9 right now, so we're in deep to the Weirwood magic. But to be honest, that's what you got to do. Sometimes people give me a hard time for doing long format podcasts, but you know, I answered one guy on YouTube a couple weeks ago. I was like, look, man, you know, to really get to follow George's rabbit trails and figure out all the lore and things that he's packing into something like the Weirwoods, you have to do a lot. Like, you can't do it all in 15 or 20 minutes. You just can't. And the guy's all like, oh, climb down off your high horse, LML, but you know, whatever. But it's true. George really puts a lot of thought into his books. That's one of the reasons why they take 5 years to write. And so we're just trying to, people like you and I, Robert, are just, and everybody else in the fandom, we're just trying to do George honor and, you know, give the art its due attention. So that's what I got going on my channel, is lots of green seer talk lately. The other thing, pardon me, 1 second. The other thing I will say is that I have a second channel, just like you've started a second channel. That one's called Between Two Weirwoods, with a number 2 in between the words between and Weirwoods. And we have scheduled one for the 20th of January. I'm going to have Robert on. I'm not even sure which topic we're going to do yet. I've got 2 different panels that I was thinking about doing with Robert, and it might not be either one of those. I don't know who the guests are going to be, but what I can tell you is that Robert has given me January the 20th, and so we are going to do Between Two Weirwoods on the 20th, come hell or high water. It might just be you and me, Robert, or maybe just you and me and maybe Crowfood's daughter. I don't know. I do think I'd like to do something with the 3 of us, but January 20th on Between Two Weirwoods YouTube channel. Robert will be there. We'll have to see what the topic is, but it'll be good. It'll be fun. It'll be a discussion panel. So let's get back to the people and their questions.
Excellent. And guys, I would highly recommend you do check out LML's channel. There is, I'm not sure if I put it up there now, but I will definitely put it there when we finish this stream, a link down in the description to it. And while we're talking about me going onto LML's channel, we were also talking before going live, LML is going to come on here and do one of my favorite theory videos, which you'll probably seen. I did a couple with a couple of other content creators. This is just a chance to work through a theory in detail with a content creator, and I think we've agreed we're going to do the central theory of LML's work, which is this. We often talk about moon meteors and things like that. If you're wondering what we're talking about, why it is that people keep on joking about LML and moon meteors, check it out. It'll be on this channel at some point in the next couple of weeks. And if you would just want to hear me chatting through the ideas with LML, that's what we'll be doing. But you're right. Let's get back. We've left these questions for too long. We had a few super chats that we're going to quickly rattle through, and we've still got quite a lot of patron questions to get through. Let's do the same thing again. I'm just going to quickly take 3 of these super chats, and then LML, after that I will ask you if you've got anything to add. Mazamonti, thank you so much. TV show, do you think the Night King will raise all the dead from the recent battles to swell his army if he needs to? Could he do it? Yes, I think he will, and I think he can. I think that the whole, if you look at on a map what happened with the Night King's army, in the books, we know a whole lot less about what the others are up to and where they are. But certainly it seems very clear on the show that they've been sweeping across, picking up as many humans as they can. They go to places where there are humans, they kill them, and then they bring them back. And I think that we will see that south of the wall as well. I think that we will see, before they get to Winterfell, they will go to places like the Last Hearth, and they will sweep through that and destroy that, and then raise the humans there. The whole point of the strategy, and the whole point indeed of the creation of the White Walkers on the show, was that they were there to be using humanity's numbers against them. To the more humans that die, the more that gets raised, the army gets bigger. So yes, I think that they are capable of raising more people, and they will do that. Secondly, Marvin Martin asked, could the others be on the run from something worse? Which is a fascinating question. They could, but I think they probably aren't. I think that the linking up to Rob's missus, saying, hey, Rob, are you my missus? Don't recognize you from your profile picture. Anyway, I'm sure you have covered this a million times, but what do you think the Night King wants? What is his end game? So I think I'm going to take both of those questions together. What the others are not, what the White Walkers are not doing, is trying to escape a greater terror further north. I think that they are moving down. There are a number of options. We honestly do not yet have, particularly in the books, we do not yet have enough information to go on as to exactly what they want, but it's very clear on the show that they keep on making these symbols that are linked to the place of their creation. So what they're trying to say is that we remember our creation. So what they're after is linked to their creation. The most obvious answer, therefore, is they are there on some kind of either revenge mission or a mission to undo what happened to them to start with. So that's where they're trying to get to. And in the books, I think that end game has to be the Isle of Faces, because that is the heart of the Weirwood network as far as we can understand. LML, is there anything you want to add on to any of those things?
Yeah, now we're cooking here with gas in the grill. So the idea that the Starks have the blood of the other because they stole an other baby. The whole point of that is that the others want their owed a baby, essentially. They're owed a Stark baby, and that is Jon. So this is the theory that Jon is the prince that was promised to the others. Like, the whole reason why we owe a kid to the others is not because they stole Gilly's baby. It's because we stole a baby from the original set of others, which I think of as Knights, King, and Queen. And that is the reason why this whole thing kind of fits together and gels to me. It's not just like a random idea. But so what do they want? Well, they want a new, I think in the book, there isn't a corporeal Night's King outside the Weirwood net. I think that whatever remains of the original Night King might exist inside the Weirwood net. And what the others might want is a new Night's King. They want a new leader. And that's why they tested Waymar and didn't kill him at first, but they tested him to see what he was about, tested his sword. And then once they figured out he was mortal and he wasn't the right one, they killed him and laughed at him. And so me and Joe Magician are kind of the same mind here, where it could be that the others are essentially looking for Jon. And when they find Jon, what they're going to want to do is not kill him, but turn him into a new Night's King. And the clue about that is Waymar rises from the dead with the one blue eye, which is kind of like an Odin symbolism, but with the other's magic. If you think of Bloodraven having the one red eye and he's like the Odin Greenseer who's fighting for Team Living. Waymar rises with one blue eye, and other sinister characters include Aemond One Eye and Euron, who have one blue eye, and they're very much playing into an archetype that is similar to the Night's King, or a leader of the others, a leader of the forces of ice, things like that. So I think there's a lot there. And I've written a lot about that in the Moons of Ice and Fire and the Blood of the Other series. And by the way, those are two of my Blood of the Moons of Ice and Fire is one of the easiest ones to get into. If you haven't done a lot of my stuff, and I see some people in the chat like, oh, which one should I start with? And, you know, and I'm telling people, you know, I'm in Werewolf Compendium 9, and start with Moons of Ice and Fire 1. If you like the others, you can pretty much just dive into Moons of Ice and Fire 1 and just see if you like it and go from there. So I'll leave it at that.
And I would add to that, you were talking about the prologue and you mentioned Joe Magician. My guest next week will be Joe Magician, and we are going to be talking about that very subject, in fact. So what I said to him was that we had him on before. I'm sure you remember. Excellent guest. And one of the things I've name checked a few times recently in these live streams is this recent re-emphasis or refocus in on the prologue of book 1 of the prologue to all of A Song of Ice and Fire, when we have this scene when we've got Waymar Royce, we've got the others being introduced, what's going on there. And Joe Magician has done a fantastic video on that. I know that, as you say, LML, you've added some to that. I think you did a live stream working your way through that as well. And so what I wanted to do next week is to work our way through that. What is the symbolism of what we're seeing here in the prologue? Because the prologue very clearly has ramifications for the entire series of books. And what are the implications for what the others want, and what their origin is, and what their fate might be. So I want to really focus in on what the others are and what we can learn about that. So if you're at all interested in that, next week I've got Joe Magician, who's got some fantastic ideas, who hopefully we can get a really good conversation going on with. And if you want to do a little bit of research before that, have a look at the prologue of book 1. It's well worth a reread, and also have a check out of his video and LML's videos on the subject as well.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up my prologue video, which I did after sort of collaborating a little bit with Joe on his video and his follow-up Q&A. We've been hashing out these prologue ideas behind the scenes for a long time, some of us myth heads. And so I did one on the prologue after sort of focusing in on it. And that was the one where I read it backwards and talked about Finnegan's Wake and stuff. Did I tell you about that?
You did, and I tried to talk to you about Jewish poetry, if I remember.
Yes, absolutely, which was a huge Ball the Bard loved that, and we vamped on that and went further with it and found that it's a real thing, and it's also a.
Yeah, I wasn't making it up.
No, well, it's of course not, Robert. But we found a couple. It led to a couple other discoveries. It's a story structure too, and it's definitely a well-known idea to do this forwards backwards symmetry thing. And so, yeah, we had a lot of fun. I just dropped the link there, and it's basically a forwards backwards mythical astronomy prologue reading. It dovetails very nicely with Joe Magician's video. So yeah, watch those two, and I'll definitely be here for that stream next week. I'll be looking forward to it. Yeah, love Joe. He's awesome.
He is indeed. Okay, guys, I want to get back into the questions. So let's do another few super chats, guys. If you're my patron, incidentally, and you're waiting for your question to come up, I've covered a few of them already, and we will be covering a few more. I just want to make sure we get these super chats because they disappear off of my screen quite quickly, and I don't want to miss any. Kelly Lausman says, "Lovely to see you, Robert and LML. Why do we never hear about how Bran the Builder died? Thank you both for all you do." That's a really good question. It's one thing that George R.R. Martin often comes back to is this idea that what happened in the Age of Heroes millennia ago, literally millennia ago, should be taken as myth. It should be taken as legend, and all we're getting is snatches of particular characters. It may be more than one person getting morphed into one. It may not be the story we hear may not be the complete truth. It may be more kind of thematic. It may be elaborated over time. So why we didn't hear about his death is because we don't get a full story. We just get a few highlights about different things that different people did, and that's the way of it. We don't hear about details of how many of these characters. Lan the Clever, we don't know how Lan the Clever died either. That doesn't affect our understanding, because the point of Lan the Clever is what Lan the Clever did in order to get Casterly Rock from the Casterlys, and so that's the point. And so the point of Bran the Builder is not so much about how Bran the Builder died, but what he was building. As is the way of the Starks, they were quite straightforward in how they labeled people. Bran the Builder was a builder, and so that's the and Brandon the Breaker broke something, and so this is quite straightforward. So that's why we don't hear about it, because I would argue it probably wasn't the important point. Jared McKinnon, thank you so much. $5. Just wanted to show some love. Left a question on Patreon. Whenever you get to it, yes, I saw that. I will get to that question in just a moment. Time for a Kiss says, if you had to hug and kiss someone in the Game of Thrones show, who would it be? And where would you like to live together? And in Deep Geek, you look more handsome shaved. Thank you very much. I'll get a little, it'll grow a little bit more. I just shaved this morning. I can certainly answer the bit about where I would live. I would love to live in Bravos. I think Bravos is an astonishing city, and it's just got so much. We only see a few little bits and pieces on the show when we get Arya there, but the politics and the culture and the theater and the life of that city is just astonishing. I would absolutely love to go and live there. LML, is there anything on those questions you want to pick up on? LML, are you there? It looks like you might have bunked out for a moment. So
no,
you are there.
I just slid back under the banner in time. Yeah, no, I was grabbing something. I actually tackled a couple of those in the chat, so I will leave it at that.
Okay, well, we'll move on swiftly then. Marianne Hadley, thank you very much. Was John the prince that was promised to the others? Is another slight twist on this idea. So I'm assuming that's not. Are they thinking that he is the prince that was promised in order to oppose them? But is he the prince that was promised to them? LML, that's the kind of thing that you lap up. Is there something going on there?
Well, that's what I mean. That's basically what I was just talking about earlier. That the Starks are founded on a stolen other baby, and they owe one back, and that's John, and that's why they're figuratively watching at his birth and waiting for him and looking for him in the Waymar prologue. I mean, that's basically the whole deal. And the other end of that is just that the others actually have prophecy and can see things coming. Somebody asked me, like, well, how do the others know if it's going to be a moon, if it's going to be another, moon meteor event? It's like, well, the others have stars in their eyes. Of course they're good astronomers. Of course they could see the stars coming.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily go along with that. I think that no, I will leave that. I'll leave that one as is. There is Catherine Scully, $5 Canadian, saying, is Craster Bloodraven's son? Now, this is a good question. So Craster, allegedly, we get a couple of characters. I can't remember which one's kind of gossiping about Craster was his father was a member of the Night's Watch, outer ranging, and obviously we know that Bloodraven did go ranging north of the Wall, so perhaps there's something going on there. My feeling is probably not, for the simple reason that I can't see much of Bloodraven in Craster's character, but that's just That's just me. I don't think it makes huge amounts of difference, but I can't. And this is the point at which LML is probably going to dig out a huge amount of evidence here, but I can't personally see any evidence, or I haven't seen any evidence that kind of points at that being the case. I think he's probably just the son. I see no reason why he can't be the bastard child of a Night's Watchman, but I can't see a reason why it should be Bloodraven. But LML, have you got anything on that?
So, like I alluded to earlier, I do think there's a lot of evidence that the original Night's King had the blood of the dragon, and that the cold fire of the others sort of represents the idea of turning the blood of the dragon cold, turning fire cold, freezing fire, all that stuff. So if that's the case, Craster is essentially one of our best Night's King parallels, because the original Night's King, according to legend, was said to be sacrificing to the others with Night's Queen. And that's exactly what they call Craster giving his babies, his male sons, to the others, is sacrificing to the others. They're his gods, they're his sacrifices, on and on and on. So that gives us a strong clue that sacrificing to the others basically means giving them children. And so in that sense, Craster is doing something similar to Night's King. So if Night's King had blood of the dragon, maybe Craster does too. That would make it a better parallel, right? Well, so we know Craster is the bastard child of a Night's Watchman, and it could be actually either Maester Aemon or Bloodraven, could both potentially be that person. And I don't think there's a lot of really strong direct evidence. I actually don't have a pile of it there. It's more like I'm looking at Night's King as somebody who should be a Blood of the Dragon person. And so everybody that is a Night's King emulation has clues about that. Like Aemond One Eye is a Night's King character. Euron is a Night's King character. He's not Blood of the Dragon, but he wants dragons and wants to be a Valerian. So that's what we get from him, so on and so forth. So I don't know if I like the idea, but I haven't found enough evidence to be too confident in it. I'd like to see someone like you actually dive into it, Robert, and really scour it and see what there is to be gleaned.
Yeah, and I have to say that one of the character studies I've not done is Craster, and it's something that people do ask me about quite a few times. So I just have to come back to exactly what you've said. I've not seen the evidence for it. It's not obvious, is what I'll say. Maybe there is some in there. Because I tend more towards the Night King in the show being a Stark, and therefore the others in the books being of the Stark blood, rather than being Targaryen, for some of the reasons we were covering earlier. I think that my instinct is that it's probably more likely to be just a random Night's Watchman of the with First Men blood, but I can't see that there's a particular implicit need for it to be a Targaryen, and I can't personally see, in particular, Maester Aemon being the kind of person who was already quite old when he went to the Wall. So I can't see him ranging north. He was always up as there as the Maester. I can't see him ranging north and having babies, to be honest. But we are I think I've caught up now on all of the super chats. So let's go back to some of the questions from my patrons. The Prince That Wasn't Promised, saying, I had a tinfoil thought. Do you think it's possible that Tyrion promised Jon's hand to Cersei? Now, this is a show question. Personally, I would say it's not his hand to promise, is where I would go with that. I think that this is a sort of a link to this idea that there was a cutaway when Tyrion was talking to Cersei last season. There was a cutaway, and did Tyrion agree something with Cersei that made her then come up and do this pact that she obviously then broke with Dany? My feeling is, if if Tyrion there said, well, you could always marry Jon, I don't think that that would either be the kind of thing that would necessarily persuade Cersei to do anything in particular. I think at the moment she's doing what she wants rather than what anyone else wants. And secondly, I don't think that Tyrion would feel that he's in a position to give Jon's hand away, because at that point Jon was king of the North and had not bent the knee to Daenerys. He was very much claiming his own independence. So even in his position as Hand of the Queen, Tyrion would not have the authority to give away Jon's hand, so to speak. Tomislav Viduka, another patron, I think a new patron actually, good to see you, saying, how plausible of a theory would you find a hypothesis that the point of views, I like this question, and I've read this beforehand, that the point of views in the books are actually excerpts from the Weirwood Network database, accessed by someone trying to unpuzzle this or the next cycle of Long Nights. This way, even the show ignoring some bigger parts of the story and focusing on the current cycle seems even more elegant. So this idea that the reason why we're getting the story told in the books by people's different points of view is because we're seeing what has been uploaded into the Weirwood Network. I personally, although I love the question and I love the thought behind it, I don't think this is likely. I look at it and say, okay, for something, as far as we're aware, in order for something to be uploaded into the Weirwood Network, you have to die by the Weirwood tree and be uploaded within there. Your blood has to go into it somehow. That seems to be the way that you get up into the Weirwood Network. Or you get hooked up in the same way that Bloodraven does and Bran is getting hooked up. In the books, we have a number of characters who we know die, seemingly not by a Weirwood tree or anywhere near a Weirwood tree. So, for example, we get Pate, who is one of the characters in the prologue. He doesn't die by a Weirwood tree. We get a huge amount of other characters that do not die by Weirwood trees, and yet we have points of view from them. So I do not personally think that this is what is going on, but I do like the question. Alamel, have you got any thoughts on that or the Tyrion and Jon's hand question?
I think that, yeah, no, I'd agree with you that I don't think George is going to do something quite that crazy. It's a cool idea on its own, but I don't think that's what is going to be the case. I do think, a minute ago we were talking about Tyrion going dark, and I do wonder if the show isn't planning on doing something kind of dark with Tyrion's jealousy of Jon and Dany. That could be just like a little wrinkle that they iron out and everything's fine, but it could actually lead to Tyrion, turning against them. And that could be a major point of conflict. So perhaps Tyrion is actually going to go darker in the books. I'm not totally convinced he's going to end redeemed by any means. I see him more likely to go down a dark path than Daenerys, quite frankly. But
well, I disagree on that one. I mean, I think that he could go down a dark path, but I think that it's more likely that he's reached the bottom and he's coming on his way back up. What we've got in the books with Daenerys, and this is taking us slightly away from the question, I know, but in the books with Daenerys, her story has taken her out into the Dothraki Sea and to a re-embracing of her Targaryenness. The whole point about what was happening in Meereen was that she was abandoning this idea of her being an invading Targaryen. She was being a ruler in a foreign land. And we have Quaithe there in her mind saying, remember who you are, remember you're a Targaryen. The dragons remember who you are. And then she's going out there on the back of Drogon, and the show is surely showing us how this is going to go. She's going to start getting all fire and blood on us. She's going to be burning down. We saw there's a vision of it that she had incidentally in the House of the Undying. She's going to be burning down stuff there with the the Dothraki, getting them on side. She's going to be coming back. She's going to be coming into all wars and battles and burning down fleets, and she's going to be embracing her invading Targaryen self. And I think that it's going to be people like Tyrion who, as on the show, say you can't just go over and burn King's Landing to a crisp. So I think that is much, for me, that's where their character arcs are taking them a lot more. I think that it's more that Tyrion can see the greatness in Daenerys, but also the darkness. And I think that he, having spent his time amongst the little people, pun intended, will be able to see and say to her, actually, no, you need to rein it in a little bit. So I think Daenerys is currently, her trajectory is going slightly darker than Tyrion's, would be my argument.
So I would, you're gonna let me follow up on that, right?
Yeah, of course, go.
Okay. So I think that I would not necessarily disagree, but I would qualify what you're saying. I see Dany as the end of her arc is going to be a reconciling of the idea of planting trees and freeing slaves versus being fire and blood. I think that it's not going to be a matter of her choosing. I think the choosing is a false dichotomy, and eventually she's basically getting pulled between the two things back and forth. You know, she's trying to save these people that have these diseases. She realizes that she broke Meereen and kind of bought it. And so now she's trying to stay there. She's stalling her plans of conquest to try to take care of the people. She has a lot of instincts of a good ruler, but she's also very traumatized by her experience as being a slave. She's full of vengeance. She is a Targaryen. She does have dragons. You do have to use force to meet force, and she's trying to overturn, slave culture and getting ready to confront people in Westeros. So what I would say is that George is setting up, constantly weaving these two themes of someone who plants trees. And by the way, she does actually plant trees in Meereen. She literally plants trees. And someone who is the cleansing fire or the destroying fire of fire and blood. And so I see her arc. I don't see it going anywhere else but a reconciling of those two. That's just my personal opinion and my take on it, but that's what I think is going to happen with her. And I would also say that she has a much stronger moral compass than Tyrion does. Tyrion has not shown morals really outside of his own convenience and outside of his own situation. He's raped, he's murdered cruelly, he's done all kinds of things by necessity. I don't think he's sadistic, but I would not describe him as having a strong moral compass. Whereas Dany is first and foremost an outcast and a slave, and always retains that perspective, and has demonstrated time and time again that she is trying to find justice. She's concerned with justice. She's concerned with whether or not she's becoming a monster or whether or not she is doing the right thing. And so even though she doesn't always make the right mistake, I do think that she's actually the one with the stronger moral compass as opposed to Tyrion. However, I do think that you could be right that Tyrion will provide perhaps a good counseling, wisdom against her hot temper at a key moment, perhaps. But there you go.
Yeah, in my caveat to your caveat, I would probably just say yes, that all of that is true, and I think this just shows that George R. R. Martin always has characters that are not just good or just bad. That I'm in no way is this me being down on Dany. I think clearly she's got many great qualities about her. The freeing of the slaves is obviously a huge thing, and the two characters, you can add John into this as well, particularly if you're wanting to big up the Tyrion Targaryen thing, but those three characters have got so much in common in terms of where they come from, not just in terms of their mothers died in childbirth and grew up without knowing their parents, perhaps in Tyrion's case, and the fact that they were outcasts in some sense, and all the rest of it, and also their journeys quite match. But
yeah, I agree.
I don't think I think that in terms of where they're at in their arcs, I think Dany has got a darker bit to come.
Possible, yeah.
is probably at the bottom and is working his way back up again. So it's a matter of where they intersect. But a couple of quick super chats to get to. Pardon me. Kid28 saying, I just want to big up the community. Every live stream I catch on this channel and others, there are always other creators in the chat supporting and contributing. Kudos to all. Yeah, I think this is one of the things I love about this community, is the supportive nature of it, which I think has been growing over the time that I've been paying attention. At least I think that the love that is there for other people who love the same thing is astonishing, and the chat moves by really quickly, but I quite often see other creators who I love in the chat here, and I know I certainly pop off into other places. LML often pops into the chat here. I'm sure I saw at least the Disputed Lands earlier, and there've probably been another couple of people. Yeah, it's a fantastic community.
Yeah, McWizards was here.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. And Mazamonti was building on this idea of why the others are returning. Could they also be coming now because it's going to be a very long winter, everything coming together, John, the comet, a long winter, etc. I think that this is, let's not get into all of the detail of this, but I think that there's a good question here about whether the winter brings the others or whether the others bring the winter. And certainly it's very clear that they bring the weather. Whether they bring the climate, I think, is a slightly different, or climate change, so to speak, is a slightly different question. Alamel, did you have anything to add on to either of those points?
I think I've touched on some of that already. I probably don't want to take another 5 minutes to make a big detour. Let's keep it moving, I guess. But there is a couple more super chats, and one of them is addressed to me. So let me read this one. Matt Miller says, LML does all the eye stabbing and even eye stabbing above the God's Eye, such as in the Aemon and Daemon fight, foreshadow the God's Eye as the meteor impact site, potentially destroying the Weirwood network and the spirit of Nissa Nissa. So the God's Eye lake kind of looks like a crater lake to begin with. And so it could be an impact site in the past. And what he's referring to, by the way, Robert, is that in the original myth, when it describes the moon wandering too close to the sun and then cracking open, it could be a way of describing an eclipse. You know, that's one way to say the moon is wandering close to the sun, is you've got an eclipse alignment. And then if the comet or whatever, the moon blows up at that moment, then you've got the myth, basically. And so I find that George likes to show us the idea of a comet in front of a sun in front of a moon, an eclipse, getting poked by a comet, by doing eye stabbings. And so, for example, you get the battle over the God's Eye Lake with Daemon Targaryen and Aemon One Eye, where Daemon jams Dark Sister into Aemon's eye. And so the lake itself could be like an eclipse. If the lake is the sun and the Isle of Faces is the moon, then you have literally a picture of a moon in front of a sun. And of course, the Isle of Faces is full of weirwoods, which have faces like the moon. And the weirwoods and the moon are compared to each other many times, such as in the Moon Door, the Black Gate that glows with milk and moonlight, the Temple of House of Black and White that has a moon face with half weirwood, half ebony. So there's a lot of weirwood moon associations. And then the lake of the lake around the Isle of Faces is described as being on fire a bunch of times and reflecting the light of the sun. So I do think Martin is essentially drawing a big picture of the sun-moon eclipse with the lake, and then he has dragon people stabbing each other in the eye above the lake and then falling into the lake. So it's this like almost fractal eye stabbing imagery, because when the dragons fall into the lake, that's like a stabbing too, because the lake is an eye, it's the God's Eye. So then you're stabbing the lake when you fall in. So the question that Matt is asking is, could it be that the next, if there's going to be another event, and I know, Robert, you talked with Smokescreen about the idea of burning the Isle of Faces and shutting down the Weirwood net or things like that. And it very well you could see those ideas come together here if there is an impact on the Isle of Faces. So that's not a bad idea, Matt Miller. I usually think about this as a past impact site. I picture a greasy black meteor stone with weirwood trees all around it on the Isle of Faces with a bunch of antlered stag green men, like, you know, praying around it or something like that. But who knows? Maybe it'll be the site of the next Impact 2. I don't know how George is going to do it. I think it's more likely to hit the wall, if anything. I think that's the main clue I'm picking up, is that the next destruction event will be the thing that brings down the wall and the thing that hides the sun. So it'll pave the way for the others to invade perfectly, essentially, in one stroke.
Yeah, I think the next destruction event in the next but one in the books is going to be that. Obviously, whatever Euron's doing down south, I think will also be quite a big destruction moment. There is definitely a video, and it's something that I've thought about a few times and never quite got the angle I want to go at it from right in my mind, which I've kind of shied away from it. But there's definitely a video out there somewhere that needs to be done, I think, at which point I'm sure LML's going to tell me, someone who's already done it, linking all of the single eye imagery and people in the story that we've got, because we've obviously got Bloodraven, we've got Euron, who else we got? We got Beric, we've got the God's Eye. It's just a single eye, and there's also a huge amount of imagery about killing Meraxus. The first dragon that we hear of dying is killed by a single arrow in one eye. There's a lot of
Sunfire gets one eye wound. John has a scratch over one eye.
Yeah.
It goes on and on. There's tons of them.
There's so much of it, and I think that if I could come up with the angle that I was wanting to come from, then that's certainly a video I'd want to make. But I'd love to.
What's the angle that you take on that? Because it's all Odin symbolism, and if you're not going to talk about Odin, then don't even make the video. That's what I would say.
well, there you go.
To be cantankerous. About it.
Okay, but anyway, so I think that's just another angle on it that I haven't yet fully explored myself. Marvin Martin, thank you so much for the super chat. Just picking up on, I think, the point I was making earlier about George R.R. Martin making all characters grey in some respect, asking how Joffrey, Ramsay, the Mountain, and so on are grey characters. I think grey perhaps was the wrong choice of words. I think that they are three-dimensional characters, in that Joffrey is indeed not a nice person, and there is almost no redeeming aspect to him as a character. However, you can understand why he is like that, and that is the three-dimensional aspect to him, is that he isn't just this baddie who wakes up and wants to do evil because he thinks, oh, hey, you know what, I'm going to pick on some people today, I'm going to do some bad stuff. That's not what he's about. He does things, the implication is he does things for almost understandable reasons. We might not sympathize with them, but we can understand them. There's the whole idea, Tyrion goes through a whole thought process about why Joffrey might have wanted to kill Bran, and he decides that perhaps it's because he wanted to impress his father, Robert Baratheon, the person he thought was his father. And that, although it's perhaps not, it's not good in any way, you understand this desire to please your parents. It's just that he did it in an odd way. So that, I think, is probably a better way of saying it than grey, to talk about three-dimensional characters, and that is something that George R.R. Martin tries to do. He often quotes this, I can't remember where it comes from initially, but this idea of everyone is a hero in their own story. So all of the characters that he rolls out thinks that they are doing the right thing in some way. We may disagree with them, sometimes very strongly, but in order for them to be a realistic character, they have to believe that they are doing good or right, or just what they want to do. Very, very few people wake up and think, you know what, I'm going to do bad things today. That is where the three-dimensional characters come from. Let's pick up on a couple of other patron questions. Jared McKinnon, this is one I wanted to throw to you, LML. I think you'll probably have some good answers on this one. And this was you super chatted earlier, actually, so finally got to your question on Patreon. What, if anything, do you think is the significance of the boat that Tyrion takes to Meereen? being called, and I shall mispronounce this, I'm sure, the Selasori Koran, which roughly translates to the perfumed seneschal. Now,
Stinky Steward.
Exactly, it's indeed the Stinky Steward, as Tyrion himself calls it. But there is, again, we get these warnings that Quaithe gives Dany, saying, "Beware the perfumed seneschal," amongst other things. The sort of the general assumption is that this is talking about Varys, who is indeed a perfumed seneschal, but also we have this boat here, which is carrying not just Tyrion and Jorah, but also Mokoro, this red priest. So do you think there's any significance beyond the obvious to this?
George hates garlic.
That's possible, but I know you have more than that.
Yeah, so I would say that probably this is a fairly low-level mystery in the sense that naming the boat that rescues Tyrion, the perfumed seneschal, is just an allusion to the fact that it's Varys who essentially has smuggled Tyrion out of there. And I would say that there's also a perfumed seneschal in Meereen, would be Resnack. But if you look at it as an archetype, then it's like, well, Dany's gonna, she's gonna ditch one perfumed seneschal and probably run into another one. So by the time it's all done, we might be able to see some sort of repeating pattern. I haven't thought too much about this ahead of time, so I don't have any specific clues from the boat itself. I don't remember like what the boat looked like, or if there's descriptive clues that add to the picture. I don't have anything like that on tap. But as you're talking there, I mean, Varys is the one who sent the boat, so it could be George just kind of having a little fun there.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. That's the kind of like an extra level to it. I think that it's just a little hint to what's going on and why Tyrion is on his way there in the first place. Couple of quick questions from patrons that I will pick up on. We've got Cornelia Etchzeller asking, could the White Walkers' ice spears also kill the Night King or ordinary White Walkers? I think the answer is probably no. I mean, it's a kind of a theoretical question because we don't know about the ice spears, exactly what they are. But as far as we're aware, we know the things that are deadly to the White Walkers. Ice is their thing. That's what they make and create stuff from. So personally, I suspect not. And another question from Donna Bettis saying, do you think we will ever hear the punchline to Tyrion's honeycomb and jackass joke on the show? I tragically, I think not, but I did I think it was Twitter, see what I thought was the best ending to that, which I shall, if I remember, I shall retweet. I shall go back and find it and I shall retweet, because I thought actually that's an ending worthy of that joke. But the one question I was wanting to put to you, LML, this was from Seneca Black saying, what do you make of the mention of the prophecy of ancient days in Fire and Blood, with a reference to Hugh Hammer, that when the hammer shall fall upon the dragon, a new king shall arise, and none shall stand before him? Any ideas on who started its circulation around Tumbleton? Now, for those who haven't read Fire and Blood, and in fact, probably for many of those who have, I didn't pick up on it straight away the first time I read through it. But Hugh Hammer is one of these dragon seeds who are the bastard children of Targaryens who get a dragon to ride during the Dance of the Dragons. Hugh Hammer is one of these who, as his name would suggest, big man, wields a hammer, and he hears this prophecy, which is around Tumbleton, is what we hear, which is about the hammer falling upon the dragon, and a new king shall arise, and none shall stand before him. Now, he seems to think that this is probably about him because he's got a big hammer, and the reader is obviously invited to think, oh, this is actually about Robert Baratheon, with him using his warhammer and killing the dragon Rhaegar and becoming king. But do you think beyond those kind of obvious levels, LML, is there anything to be added to that? And is there any particular importance attached to Tumbleton, which is where this seems to come from?
I'm not sure about the Tumbleton part, but the rest of it, I would say that when Robert killed Rhaegar, there was a new king that was made, in the sense that a new king was born, and that would be Jon Snow. He's the one that nobody can stand against, because he's going to become an invincible zombie killer, like Cold Hands, who doesn't need to eat or sleep, and he will basically live forever unless someone burns him or destroys him. And so he will literally be the king that the others cannot stand against, or anybody that he chooses to fight. And so that, I think, is the deeper meaning. There's also some pretty good astronomy behind that, as far as the hammer and the dragon. That's Hammer of the Waters and Dragon Meteor talk. So if it goes back to Azor Ahai in a sense, then Azor Ahai became king, became the Bloodstone Emperor, if you will, when he dropped the Hammer of the Waters, which was a meteor dragon, if you will. So it's all happens at the same time.
Yeah. Agreed. And we have Joe Magician in the chat. We were talking about you earlier, Joe. You're going to be on here next week, and we're going to be talking about the prologue, and I'm really excited about that. That's something I've been talking to LML about earlier in this stream. Great to see you. We've got Quetzalcoatl. Apologies, I've mangled your name. Euron, this is 5 New Zealand dollars by the looks of it. Euron most certainly wakes up and thinks, I'm going to do bad things today. It's a part of what makes him so entertaining. He's evil and he loves it. So this is building on what I was saying a moment ago about the fact that nobody tends to wake up and just think, you know what, I'm going to do evil things today. Although I agree to a certain extent that he does enjoy doing those kinds of things, he is doing these things not just for the sake of doing them, but also partly because he has been driven largely insane, and was reasonably insane to start with, but also partly because he's got a longer term plan, which is a crazy plan, but it is his plan. He's not just waking up and randomly trying to do bad things. He wants to be something in and of for himself, because he is the hero in his own story. As I say, it's not so much about having grey characters, it's about having 3-dimensional characters. And Euron is a 3-dimensional character because he has something which is driving him, and there are also things in his past that allow us to understand why he is doing that, and partly it's because he's been overdosing on the sort of the anti-Weirwood paste, which is what I would call it, and he's been and that's been giving him visions that he is now trying to recreate. LML, I can see your hand going up. Everyone loves to talk about Euron. Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you're on Shade of the Evening, then Euron is a 4-dimensional character. But seriously, no, he's definitely. I responded to that super chat when it came up, and I was like, yeah, fair point. He does kind of revel in searching for the dark power, but I would say that he's basically amoral more than anybody else. Like, he's like above right and wrong, which is a classic mythical trope. He basically believes he's like the Targaryens. He's like a god on Earth, and he is simply not bound by the laws of man. He does not, feel a hint of sympathy for anyone. But he's not exactly necessarily a sadist in the way that Ramsay is, or Joffrey. He's very much like just on a lot of drugs, and he's like a crazy cultist or something.
Yeah, I agreed. I don't think I've got huge amounts to add to that. We've got just 2 or 3 more questions from my patrons coming up. So, guys, now is the time we will rattle our way through these ones. I think.
Yeah, I
But
actually do have some only a few more minutes to go, and then I've got to run along to do something else.
okay, well, in that case, I will. Let's do the same thing. I've got 4 questions. I will quickly pick my way through these 4 and then see if you've got anything to add to them. And guys, if you've got any final questions for the chat, now is the time to drop them in. Karen Richmond asks, will we see Sansa fight? She doesn't appear to have trained as Jon decreed everyone should. So will always be behind those who have learned, or will she end up having to defend herself against a white or a human? I don't know whether she will end up in that situation either in the books or the show, but no, that's not what her strengths are. Her strengths very clearly have come out is that she is very good at managing and organizing the management of a castle and a realm. So that those are what her strengths are, and those anyone who I don't need to say it, but it's central to any military strategy is to get the logistics right, and she's the person who's in charge of the logistics. So her contribution is no less than anyone else's, I personally believe. Jack Hurst saying, just wanted to know your reaction to the hold the door reveal when you first saw it. I really hope there's 1 or 2 more unpredictable reveals that are just as surprising. Yeah, I loved the hold the door thing. That worked so well for me. I thought that was one of these moments where the TV version of it got it just right. And I've talked about this a few times about the shift when they've moved away from the books, because the books are finished and it's just a TV show. There are many downsides. Lots of people have talked about the downsides of it. I share a lot of the disappointments that many other people have had about what happened to certain characters and certain storylines. But when they get it right, I think they get it really, really right. And I think there are a few excellent examples of this with the Battle of the Bastards and here with Hold the Door. The way that they showed that happening, I thought was just brilliant, mixing in what happened at 2 different periods of time, showing things from Mira's perspective, seeing what was happening with Bran. I thought that was such an exceptional 5-10 minutes worth of TV. I thought it worked really well. I was completely blown away by it. Anime lover Nicole says, who do you think is the father of Lyanna Mormont? Do her older sisters have the same father or not? And could this be different between the books and the show? I think Tormund could have a chance. Well, yes, there is every chance that Tormund throws away. And I think actually Alt Shift X I've seen has done a good video on this, the possibility that Tormund might be Lyanna's father. He talks about sleeping with a she-bear. Obviously, the Mormonts are from Bear Island, and so that there's a sort of a hint there, possibly. On the show, I certainly don't think they're going to raise this. I don't think it's going to be an issue at all. In the books, similarly, I think it's just going to be left as a possibility. I don't think it's the kind of thing that will be discussed or will be central to how the whole plot plays out. But is it possible? Yes, very possible in my view. And then Natalie Donald, do you think the Bale the Bard story has any significance in the story? Will this be echoed? Has it already?
Sorry.
LML, you're laughing. Do you wanna answer this one sort of as a rather than those other 3? Pick up on this one.
Bale the Bard is another echo of the idea of a Night's King figure who I see Bale the Bard and Mance Rayder both playing that role, slipping their genes into House Stark, which is more about this stolen other baby. It's a little bit different because instead of the baby being stolen away, they sort of hide in the crypts. But I've written a lot about it, I guess I will say, and it's in the Blood of the Other series, and it very much plays into the echo of this stolen other baby archetype that I was been talking about. So it's very important. And obviously it has a lot of RLJ. That's the more obvious thing, I guess. It has tons of RLJ implications.
It does, and in the books, clearly there's a link to Mance Rayder, who is Abel the Bard, is the nom de plume that he takes for himself. And there's also, I think, I would personally argue, there's a Theon kind of like illusion that's happening there in terms of rescuing Arya/Jane Poole.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of yes is the short answer. This is one of those archetypes, one of those things that are echoing down through history. I'm very aware, LML, you need to dash off. I think we have astonishingly managed to get to the end of both the super chats and my patrons' questions. So, LML, if you want to just, I think we'll wrap it up there. Actually, we've been going for 2 hours. Do you want to just remind people where they can find you on the internet?
Lucifer Means Lightbringer is the main thing you have to remember. If you search for that, you'll find lucifermeanslightbringer.com, and you'll find my YouTube channel, Lucifer Means Lightbringer. The main thing I want to tell everyone is try to, if you can, remember to go subscribe to my second channel, Between Two Weirwoods, with the number 2, Between Two Weirwoods, because that is where I host discussion panels that are sort of outside of my mythical astronomy body of jargon. And those can basically be on any topic. I've had, I think, 7 so far. And we're going to be doing the next one with Robert on January 20th. I have yet to announce what the topic is going to be. We've got a couple of ideas, but we'll be sure to tell everyone. And I'll make sure Joe Magician promotes it when he goes on your channel next week. So that's it, guys. Between Two Weirwoods and Lucifer Means Lightbringer. If you're looking in your podcast feed, it's Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire for the podcast. And there's also Between Two Weirwoods as a podcast feed. So that's it, guys. Thanks for having me on, Robert. And like I said, I'm looking forward to your deal next week. I guess I should also mention I do have basically every Sunday I do a live stream. 3 out of 4 weeks it's on the Lucifer Means Lightbringer channel, except when we do a Between Two Weirwoods. But it's always Sunday at 3 Eastern. So if you're don't got anything to do, not a football fan, then come on in. And even if you are a football fan, put that shit on mute and come and join us 3 Eastern. So that's it. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Okay, guys, I would highly recommend you do go and check out LML's channels. And I will be there, as he said, on the 20th, and we'll be talking about, don't know what yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. Guys, I've really enjoyed this. It's great having LML on. We've had some fantastic questions. Apologies if we didn't get to your question, but thank you for the super chats and also to my patrons. If you are interested in becoming a patron, supporting the channel, getting access to some other exclusive stuff that I do, please do go check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/InDeepGeek. Link down there in the description. LML is holding up something. Go on. What?
Yes, this is my foam keeper. This is my Waves of Night and Foam. So this is a foam oath keeper that I colored with paint dipping, and I've been showing it off on every live stream for the past couple of weeks. So there you go.
Wow,
what do you think?
That's just when I was thinking just when I was thinking of ending things, and you drop whatever you call it, a foam keeper. It's a thing of beauty. No, let's not go there. It's a thing of beauty, and it's been a delight to have you on, guys. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. We will be back this time next week on this channel. I will have Joe Magician, and we're going to be talking some fantastic stuff about the others, about the prologue to Game of Thrones. Take care, everyone. Thanks again to LML. Please do check out his channels. Please do check out my Patreon page, and I shall see you again same time next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.